In order to get started, I want to talk about a play. In the opening line of actually both the play and the movie, Dear Evan Hansen, we see a high school student who is writing a letter to himself, and he says this. We're going to throw it on the screen. He says, "Dear Evan Hansen," so he's writing a letter to himself. "Today is going to be an amazing day, and here's why. Because today, all you have to do is just be yourself. But also confident, that's important and interesting, easy to talk to, approachable, but mostly be yourself." That's number one, be yourself, be true to yourself. Caught my attention because in about 10 sentences, Evan here gives himself the advice to just be yourself, or to be yourself 4 times. And if you notice, the very first time he says it, he says, "Just be yourself." Normally, we add the word "just" to anything that is simple or easy to do. So just make your bed, just clean your room, just do your homework, just get along with your sibling, and sometimes just be yourself. Now, in my personal, subjective opinion, I think that's good advice, but I understand how it can be a little bit complicated when you are a teenager. Both in my experience as a young person and working with teenagers, I think it's pretty common for young people to have a few different versions of themselves. So you have the version of yourself that your parents see, and you also have the version of yourself that your school friends see or your church friends see. Sometimes you have different versions of yourself online with people there, which is why I think that telling a teenager sometimes to just be yourself, sometimes it can kind of come across like telling a utility tool, hey, just do what you do best. Just be yourself, even if it feels like it's a little bit more complicated than that. A couple years back, the Fuller Youth Institute, they conducted a national survey of a couple thousand teenagers, and then they followed it up with a few narrative analysis interviews, and they were trying to understand how most U.S. teenagers would answer the following statement, or how they would finish the following statement. We'll throw it on the screen. I am blank. I am blank. When it comes to young people and their identity, when it comes to them defining themselves, they were trying to figure out what are some of the primary feelings that students have about themselves. And according to researchers, they think that U.S. teenagers would tend to finish that statement with some of the following phrases that we'll throw on the screen. I am what others expect. So in other words, I try to be who I think other people need or want me to be. Or I am not blank enough. You can fill in the blank with the adjective of your choice. I'm not talented enough, attractive enough, whatever. A lot of young people reported in this study feeling like they were not enough. And then lastly, I am my image. I have to be the leader, or I have to be the funny person. I have to be the good Christian because that's kind of how everyone else perceives me. So that's what I have to stick to. Now, in full disclosure, I'm leaving out their fourth statement just for simplicity's sake. But the connection that I want to make is that whenever we think about what it means for us to be ourselves, if we resonate with any of the ideas on the screen in any way, well, first off, that kind of sucks. And secondly, we're going to have a really hard time just being ourselves. If we feel like what that means is, okay, well, be what other people need me to be, or be better so that other people will think better of me, or if we feel like we have to keep up an image, or if we constantly feel like we're just not measuring up. And that's why we've been studying the life of Jacob over the past month, because in many ways, Jacob's story, it's a story all about his identity. It's a story of conflict, and we've been saying that over and over again because he's constantly fighting with himself and with other people. But if you read his story from beginning to end, you can start to pick up that the reason he's constantly having conflict is because he's trying to establish his identity. This is what we've covered over the past couple of weeks. In week 1, we did an overview of Jacob's life, and we saw how he wrestled with the expectations that were on him and how he handled the pressure of his parents. Week 2, we looked at the story of Jacob and his brother Esau. Jacob was the younger sibling who stole from his older brother. He stole his older brother's blessing and his birthright. And then as a result, or afterwards, Jacob kind of ran away from home. And then last week, if you were here, we looked at Jacob, what he did after he ran away. He got married and he lived with his wife's family. And his father-in-law was a guy named Laban. Jacob and Laban, they lived in competition with each other for about 2 decades, and then they ended up ruining their relationship. And if you follow the narrative chronologically, Genesis chapter 32, it records the story of when Jacob finally leaves Laban's land, and he starts to head back home. And he's on his way back home, and he actually has an encounter with God that changes both his life and really his identity forever. Here's how the story starts in Genesis chapter 32, verse 22. It says, that night, Jacob got up and he took his 2 wives, his 2 female servants, and his 11 sons and crossed the ford of the Jabbok. After he had sent them across the stream, he sent over all his possessions. So Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him till daybreak. Now, there's a couple instances throughout the Old Testament where God seems to show up kind of as a human. So you may remember that scene in Genesis chapter 3 where it says Adam and Eve heard the sound of God walking in the garden. There's another story in Genesis chapter 18 where Abraham is like by his tent, and then these 3 men show up, and then somehow those 3 men are identified with God himself. And in this moment, we're going to see how the man who starts wrestling with Jacob comes to be identified as God. But before we keep reading, I want you to notice what has to happen before Jacob is able to encounter God in this way. The end of verse 23 says that he sent over all his possessions, and then verse 24 says he was left alone. He was left alone. You know what's interesting about the Jacob narrative is that he usually encounters God when he gets alone. There's something about being alone that just makes it easier to kind of give God our full attention. And we see this not just in Jacob's life, but in a lot of people's lives throughout the scripture and church history. Famous figures like Moses, Elijah, the Apostle Paul, they all have stories of having powerful encounters with God when they get alone. Henry Nouwen was a Dutch priest and a professor. He has this great line that we're going to throw on the screens. He says this: without solitude, which is the practice of being alone, without solitude, it is virtually impossible to live a spiritual life. We do not take the spiritual life seriously if we do not set aside some time to be with God and listen to him. Now, I throw that up there not to make anyone feel bad about your own spiritual habits. Rather, what I'm trying to highlight is that God followers, both in the scriptures and then throughout history, have demonstrated a pattern which is getting alone to be with God. Because there's something about getting alone in the quiet and just giving God our full attention where it starts to become, I don't know if easier is the right word, it makes us more sensitive to his voice and to his promptings. And up to this point in the Jacob narrative, I mean, you may remember over the past couple weeks, Jacob has spent a lot of time and energy obsessing over what other people have, working hard to get what he wants, but he hasn't spent much time alone. Spent a lot of time trying to get his way, but he has not practiced learning what is God's way. So right here in our passage, he's alone. And God shows up mysteriously in the form of a human. And in order to get Jacob's full attention, God starts to wrestle with him. Here's how the story goes on. Verse 25. When the man saw that he could not overpower Jacob, he touched the socket of Jacob's hip, so that his hip was wrenched, and he was as he wrestled with the man. Then the man said, "Let me go, for it is daybreak." But Jacob said, "I will not let you go unless you bless me. I'll not let you go unless you bless me." And if you've been following along, you may recognize, there it is again. Jacob has been chasing this blessing his entire life. He stole from his brother. He deceived his father in order to get this blessing. He manipulated his father-in-law in order to get this blessing. And you have to understand that in the ancient Israelite culture, they really believed that blessings were like way more valuable than we believe blessings are today. For them, everything good was a result of God. So if someone was skilled or talented, it's because they were blessed by God. If someone was wealthy and healthy, it's because they were blessed by God. If someone had great relationships, it was a result of them being blessed by God. So Jacob goes after these blessings because he's trying to get what these blessings can give him. But I think he's also trying to find his identity. If you remember the story, before Jacob was born, God spoke to Jacob's mother, and he told her that eventually Jacob would become someone very special. So Jacob has lived his entire life with the pressure of that promise. Which is why I don't think Jacob is just trying to become more happy or successful through these blessings. Rather, he's trying to become someone who is blessed. He's trying to become someone who lives up to the pressure that he feels. He's trying to prove to other people that he matters, that he's special, that he's important, and that he's actually worthy of love. So in this moment, he's all alone with God, and he actually believes, I can hold on to him until he blesses me. If you can kind of imagine having a moment to secure the identity that you really desire. Like you could finally be more talented, you could finally feel like you're enough, be prettier, smarter, stronger, whatever it is. You have a moment with God where you felt like, I can make him give me that. That's where Jacob feels. He's given God all of his attention, and now he knows I have all of God's attention, so he demands to be blessed. And this is how God responds to his request. Verse 27, the man asked him, what is your name? Well, it's Jacob, he answered. And in the ancient world, names carried a lot more significance than they do today. There's a variety of ways to interpret the meaning of the name Jacob. But one of those meanings is that Jacob is the one who deceives, or he's the one who takes from others. So when God asks him, what is your name? I have to imagine Jacob kind of frustrated when he has to be honest this time, and he has to say, well, I'm Jacob. I'm the one who deceives. I'm the one who takes things. I think sometimes we adopt the same posture with our flaws and our failures, where we kind of turn our mistakes into our identities. We start to live out narratives like, I'm the one who sins a lot, I'm the one who nobody likes, I'm the one who isn't good enough. And I can kind of imagine some pain in Jacob's voice when he has to be honest and say, okay, I'm wrestling for this blessing because I'm the one who takes things. I'm fighting because that's what I do. And can I just say that there might be some of us, you behave a certain way because someone in authority said something over you and you believed it. Someone told you that you aren't smart, so you just stopped trying in school. Or someone told you that you weren't pretty, or they described a feature about you in a negative way, so you just never feel good about yourself. Someone told you that you're a bad kid, so you just started making bad decisions. One of the things that the Jacob story illustrates for us is that no matter how other people see us or what other people have said about us, God's voice is the one that we want to listen to. Here's God's response to Jacob, verse 28. Then the man said, your name will no longer be Jacob, but Israel, because you have struggled with God and with humans, and you have overcome. If I can get Evan to jump back on the keys, I can start to finish up, and then we're going to spend some time praying. You can see on the screen, the word Israel is a compound word. So if you look on the screen, we'll throw it up. You can break the word Israel into two parts. The first part of the word is a verb that often in Hebrew is translated as to strive, to fight, or to prevail. And then the second part of the word is a title for God. So one way of translating the word is that God strives, or God prevails, or the way the New English translation interprets it, God fights. And this brings us to a bit of a turning point in Jacob's life. Because up to this moment, Jacob's name has functioned as a bit of a reminder for him. I'm the one who takes things. I'm the one who deceives other people. That's his identity. And like I said, I think it can be really easy for some of us to develop similar thoughts about ourselves. I'm the annoying one, I'm the mistake, I'm not good enough. The list is endless. But right here, God speaks to him and he says, I'm going to give you a new name. Which, by the way, in ancient culture, for someone to present someone else with a name, it was an act of someone in authority. This is why you might remember in Genesis chapter 2, in the creation account, when God creates Adam, he says, hey, go and name the animals. It is God's way of giving humanity dominion over the whole earth. It's God's way of telling humans, hey, you're actually in charge of all creation, steward it, love it, care for it. That's what it meant when God had Adam name the animals. It's an act of someone in authority. So right here in our passage, when God renames Jacob, it's kind of God's way of telling Jacob, hey, Jacob, first of all, you didn't even make yourself, okay? So if you want to discover yourself, you can't just look to yourself. You actually have to look to the one who made you. And then the name that God gives him, Israel, it's not even about Jacob. It's about God. You can literally say that God tells Jacob, I'm going to call you God Fights. And it's kind of like God is having this moment with Jacob, and he wants him to see, hey, Jacob, when you think about yourself, because you've been wrestling and you've been trying to fight and you've been trying to establish your own identity, you've been trying to get blessed and get ahead and get what other people have. Jacob, when you think about yourself, I don't want you to just think about yourself. I actually want you to think of me. I actually want you to think about the fact that I made you, that I created you on purpose, with a purpose, that I know you, that I literally know everything about you, the good, the bad, the ugly, the sin, the shame, the anxiety, the worry, the fear, the talent, the gifting, the purpose. Like, I know all of it, and I love you. It's like God is having this moment with Jacob, and he's telling him, Jacob, I know how some mornings you wake up and you try so hard to be just like everyone else, or you try so hard to be something for everyone else. But Jacob, when I see you, I see someone I love. I see someone I made. I see someone I know. And in this moment where God renames Jacob, it's God trying to put an end to Jacob's fight for identity, and it's God reshaping Jacob's identity to an identity that's not just built around Jacob, but that's actually built on God. Which leads me to my last verse this morning. I want to show you the way Eugene Peterson translates Matthew chapter 9. He has a master's degree, or had a master's degree in Semitic languages. This is a really loose translation, but I think it's appropriate. He translates Jesus's idea to be this in Matthew chapter 9. These are Jesus' words according to Eugene Peterson's translation. Jesus said, if your first concern is to look after yourself, you'll never find yourself. But if you forget about yourself and you look to me, you'll find both yourself and me. If you forget about yourself and you look to me, you'll find both yourself and me, which is why I feel like just be yourself. I think it's fine advice, but we have to already know who we are. And the invitation of God is for us to not just look at ourselves to find ourselves, but to look at Jesus, to look at how he lived, to look at what he taught, to look at how he fought for us through his giving, through him giving his life, and to stop trying to find ourselves by ourselves, but to trust every morning, every night, when we think about ourselves, to think about the fact he made me, he knows me, he loves me. It's what God was trying to teach Jacob, is that if we really want to find ourselves, it happens when we follow him. Or said another way, we find ourselves when we follow Jesus. When we actually take our eyes off of ourselves, take our eyes off of other people, and we look to him as the one who made us, as the one who knows us, and as the one who loves us. And with that, I want to spend a moment, honestly, just kind of letting the Spirit highlight whatever he wants to highlight in our hearts and in our minds as it relates to the fact that he made us, and he knows us, and he loves us.